My name is Emily. I'm 26 years old, and this is the part of my life I never thought I'd share with anyone. When I press record and look into this lens, I'm not just telling a story. I'm ripping open a wound that I've kept hidden behind closed doors for far too long. For years, I told myself that silence was safer, that if I stayed quiet and didn't make a sound, the storm inside my own home might pass without breaking me. But silence doesn't protect you. It only gives power to the one who wants to control you. I was the woman who smiled at neighbors, waved at coworkers, and posted happy pictures online. Nobody knew that the moment the door clicked shut, my world transformed into a prison built of fear. My husband's words were sharper than knives, his rage a shadow that swallowed the air from every room. The night he looked at me and said, "You deserve to be beaten," I didn't cry, didn't fight, didn't even speak. I just stared at him in silence, because in that silence lived the truth of my survival. This story isn't about weakness. It's about what it means to endure when the world doesn't see your suffering. It's about how silence can feel like both protection and a cage. And most of all, it's about how I finally found the courage to turn silence into a voice. So if you're here, listening now, I want you to know this. My story isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever been afraid to speak, every soul who has carried pain behind a closed door. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share may change the way you see silence forever. Before I take you inside those walls, I want to explain why I'm telling this story now. For years, I believed that speaking out would destroy me. I thought people wouldn't believe me, or worse, they'd judge me. But the truth is, silence doesn't just protect the abuser. It erases the victim. And I'm done being erased. This isn't an easy video to make. Every word I say feels like stepping barefoot across broken glass. But if my pain can reach even one person who needs to hear it, then it's worth every cut. Because I know what it feels like to live in fear, to question your worth, to believe that maybe you do deserve the pain someone else inflicts. And I also know that none of that is true. No one deserves it. Not me, not you, not anyone. That's why I need you to walk with me through this story. Stay until the end, because every chapter has a piece of me I've never revealed before. Moments that shaped not just the fear I lived in, but also the strength I didn't know I had. And if you find yourself relating, or if you know someone who might need these words, please don't keep this video to yourself. Share it. Leave a comment. Let me know I'm not speaking into an empty room. Because silence isolates, but voices connect. Finally, if you want to stand with me in breaking this silence, subscribe to this channel. It's not just about me. It's about building a space where stories like mine can exist without shame, without judgment, and without fear. Now, let me take you back to the moment everything changed, the night those words were spoken, and my silence became the loudest scream of my life. When I first met Daniel, I thought I had stumbled into the kind of love people write songs about. He was tall, charming, with a smile that could light up even the darkest room. He opened doors for me, remembered the tiniest details of our conversations, and made me feel like the most important person in the world. At 21, with a heart eager for something extraordinary, I fell fast and hard. My friends called us the perfect couple, and honestly, I believed them. Looking back now, I realize perfection was just the mask he wore before the cracks began to show. The first cracks were subtle, so small that I almost convinced myself they didn't exist. He would ask me why I wore a certain dress, then suggest another one that he thought looked better. At first I told myself it was sweet, that maybe he just wanted me to look my best. But slowly, the suggestions turned into instructions, and the instructions into demands. I told myself it was love. After all, wasn't love about caring deeply? It took me far too long to see that what he called caring was really control. In the beginning, the control didn't feel dangerous. It felt protective. He would text me constantly, asking where I was, who I was with, and when I would be home. I thought it was romantic, like he missed me so much he couldn't stand being apart. But over time, the questions turned sharper, heavier, carrying an unspoken threat beneath them. If I didn't reply quickly enough, his tone would change. Suddenly, the man who once wrote me love notes was accusing me of betraying him with nothing more than silence on my phone screen. One of the first moments I should have recognized as a warning came when he got angry that I had coffee with a college friend. It wasn't a date, just two classmates catching up. But when I mentioned it casually, his face darkened. He didn't shout that time. He didn't need to. His silence, the cold way he looked at me, was punishment enough. I spent the rest of the night apologizing for something I hadn't done wrong, believing if I could just make him feel secure, the storm would pass. That was the first time I felt the fear of losing his approval. The thing about fear is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in like water through a crack, filling spaces you didn't even know existed. Daniel still told me he loved me, still bought me flowers, still held me tightly at night. But in between those moments were flashes of a man I didn't recognize, a man whose words could cut me down faster than any blade. He would criticize the way I laughed, the way I cooked, even the way I spoke. And every time I tried to push back, he had a way of twisting the blame until I was the one apologizing. What kept me tied to him was the way he always knew how to make up for it afterward. After every cruel word came an apology wrapped in roses. He would kneel in front of me, tears in his eyes, swearing he didn't mean it, that he just loved me so much it came out wrong. And I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Because admitting that the man I had built my future around was capable of cruelty was too painful to face. So I convinced myself that the good outweighed the bad, that love was worth the cracks forming beneath our feet. As months turned into years, the cracks widened. My friends began to notice my absence. Invitations went unanswered, phone calls ignored, until slowly they stopped trying. Daniel didn't forbid me from seeing them outright. He didn't have to. He made it so exhausting to defend my choices that isolation seemed easier than the battles. He became my entire world, not because I wanted him to be, but because he designed it that way. And when the world shrinks to one person, leaving feels impossible. I remember one evening when I laughed at something on the television. It was a harmless joke, nothing extraordinary, but Daniel's eyes snapped toward me with a sharpness that froze me mid-breath. "What's so funny?" he demanded. I stammered, trying to explain, but the humor had already drained from the room. That night, I realized even my laughter wasn't safe. Joy became something I rationed, something I hid, because even happiness was a trigger I didn't understand. Living with him was like walking through a minefield. One wrong step, and the explosion was inevitable. The first time he raised his voice so loud the walls shook, I told myself it was stress. He had been working long hours, and I thought maybe he was just tired. But then it happened again, and again, until shouting became a normal part of our life. His words were weapons, sharp, brutal, designed to wound. He told me I was worthless, ungrateful, stupid. At first, I cried, then I learned not to. Tears only made him angrier. Silence became my shield, my only defense in a war I didn't know how to escape. That silence, though, came at a cost. The more I swallowed my words, the smaller I became. My world shrank until I barely recognized myself. I stopped looking in mirrors because the woman staring back wasn't the vibrant, hopeful girl I once was. She was hollow, fragile, a shadow of someone who used to believe in love. And yet, even then, even in my emptiness, I stayed, because leaving him felt more terrifying than staying. Until one night, when his rage finally crossed the line, and I learned just how dangerous silence could truly be. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of night that should have been ordinary. I was cooking dinner, stirring a pot of pasta while music played softly in the background. Daniel came home later than usual, his face tense, his jaw tight. I knew before he spoke that something was wrong. He threw his briefcase onto the couch with a force that made me flinch, and before I could even ask how his day had been, his voice cut through the air like a blade. He accused me of ignoring him, of caring more about the food on the stove than his arrival. My hands shook as I tried to explain, but explanations had no place in that house. The argument escalated faster than I could process. He paced the kitchen, his voice rising, his eyes narrowing until they burned holes through me. I tried to stay calm, whispering apologies, lowering my tone, hoping to soothe the storm. But storms don't listen to whispers. When I turned to check the pasta, I felt his hand clamp down on my arm. The grip was so tight it made me gasp. I looked at him, stunned, searching for the man I thought I loved, but all I saw was rage. And then it happened. His hand flew across my face, the sharp crack echoing louder than any word he'd ever spoken. The world went silent in that moment. My ears rang, my skin burned, and I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, with his handprint seared onto my cheek. My first thought wasn't even about the pain. It was disbelief. This couldn't be real. Daniel, the man who once kissed my forehead every morning, had just hit me. I stared at him in shock, waiting for him to realize what he had done, waiting for the apology I thought would come immediately. But all I saw was his chest heaving, his eyes still dark with fury. The apology did come, but not right away. First, there was silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that filled the kitchen as I held my breath, afraid of what might come next. Finally, his face softened, his shoulders sagged, and he muttered words I thought I needed to hear. "I didn't mean it, Emily. You just push me too far sometimes." His voice cracked as he pulled me into his arms, but instead of comfort, all I felt was the weight of his excuse pressing down on me. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry that I had seen the truth behind his mask. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I touched my cheek, still throbbing, and tried to convince myself it was an accident. I told myself he didn't mean it, that stress had gotten the better of him, that maybe I had done something wrong to trigger his anger. I replayed the scene over and over, trying to rewrite it in my mind. But no matter how I spun it, the sound of his hand striking my face haunted me. And yet, I stayed silent. I didn't tell a soul. Shame bound my lips tighter than any chain ever could. The next morning, Daniel was back to being the man I had fallen in love with. He kissed my forehead gently, as if nothing had happened, and handed me a bouquet of flowers he must have picked up on his way home. "I'm sorry," he said again, this time with more sweetness in his voice. "It'll never happen again." His smile was soft, his eyes filled with remorse, and for a fleeting moment, I believed him. I wanted so badly to believe him, because believing the alternative, that the man I loved was capable of hurting me again, was too terrifying to face. For a while, things did calm down. Weeks passed without incident, and I began to convince myself that maybe it really had been a one-time mistake. I laughed a little more, spoke a little freer, though always with caution. But beneath the surface of our normal life, the fear never left. I carried it with me like a shadow, invisible to everyone else but always pressing against my skin. Every time his voice rose, every time his eyes darkened, my body braced itself for the possibility of another strike. The truth revealed itself one evening when he came home after drinking. His steps were unsteady, his words slurred, and the moment I asked if he was okay, the switch flipped. He shouted accusations I didn't understand, calling me names that sliced deeper than any physical blow. And then, without warning, his hand struck again, this time harder. My head snapped back, and I stumbled into the counter, the taste of blood filling my mouth. The shock that had paralyzed me the first time was gone. Instead, I felt the cold certainty of a reality I could no longer deny. This was not a mistake. This was who he was. Afterward, he cried again, begged again, promised again. His apologies came with gifts, dinners, and whispered vows that he couldn't live without me. And every time, I found myself torn between fear and hope, between the truth I felt in my bones and the lies I wanted to believe. That's the cruelest part of abuse. It doesn't just break your body, it breaks your mind, twisting your reality until you question everything, even your own worth. I wish I could say I walked away then, that the second strike was enough to open my eyes completely. But leaving isn't as simple as packing a bag and walking out the door. He had chipped away at me for years, stripping me of confidence, independence, and connections. He made me believe that I was nothing without him. And so, I stayed. I stayed even as the bruises deepened, even as my silence grew heavier, even as my reflection in the mirror became unrecognizable. I stayed because fear whispered louder than reason, and deep down, I already knew the truth. The first time he hit me would not be the last. The bruises faded, but the words never did. If the physical blows left marks on my skin, his psychological ones carved wounds much deeper, invisible but constant. Daniel had a way of twisting reality until I doubted my own memory. He would say something cruel one night, and the next morning swear he never said it. When I insisted he had, he laughed and told me I was imagining things. "You're too sensitive, Emily," he would sneer, as if the problem wasn't his cruelty, but my weakness. Slowly, I began to question myself, wondering if maybe he was right and I was losing my grip on reality. Gaslighting became his favorite weapon. If I misplaced my keys, he insisted I was careless. If I cooked dinner and the pasta was too soft, he claimed I was incompetent. If I dared to disagree with him, he turned it into proof that I was ungrateful. The worst part was that he did it so convincingly that I started to believe him. I stopped trusting my own judgment, stopped trusting my instincts, until I leaned on his version of events because mine seemed unreliable. It was like living inside a maze where every path led back to him. Isolation sealed the trap. He didn't just distance me from my friends, he cut me off from my family too. Whenever my mother called, he would hover nearby, listening, interrupting, criticizing every word I said. Eventually, the phone calls grew shorter and less frequent. "They don't care about you like I do," he whispered one night as he wrapped his arms around me, and a part of me, the part that had been worn down by years of manipulation, almost believed him. He became my only source of validation, even as that validation came at the cost of my freedom. The mirror became my enemy. I avoided it because I couldn't stand the sight of the woman staring back at me. She wasn't me, not the bright, ambitious girl who once dreamed of traveling the world, finishing her degree, making a life of her own. That woman had vanished, replaced by someone who flinched at sudden movements, who measured every word before speaking, who apologized for existing. My identity had been stolen piece by piece, until I was nothing more than a shadow living in his orbit. Money was another chain he used to keep me tied to him. He insisted on controlling our finances, telling me it was for my own good. My paychecks went straight into his account, and he decided what I could and couldn't spend. When I asked for a little extra to buy a dress or a book, he accused me of being selfish and irresponsible. The message was always clear. Without him, I had nothing. And with every dollar he withheld, my independence shrank, my cage tightened, and my sense of self eroded further. Even my body stopped feeling like it belonged to me. Affection came on his terms, when he wanted it, how he wanted it. If I resisted, he sulked or lashed out, accusing me of rejecting him. If I complied, I felt hollow, like I was disappearing inside myself. Love was no longer a choice. It was an obligation. Intimacy became another weapon, another way to remind me that I was his possession, not his partner. And every time I surrendered, I felt a little piece of my soul slip away. The cruelest part was how he alternated between cruelty and tenderness. After a night of screaming and accusations, he would bring me breakfast in bed the next morning, stroke my hair, and whisper that I was the only person who truly understood him. The whiplash kept me unsteady, trapped in a cycle of fear and hope. It made me cling to the good moments, however fleeting, as proof that maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. But those moments were nothing more than bait, luring me deeper into his control. My silence became more than survival. It became my identity. I stopped speaking up in conversations, stopped expressing opinions, stopped laughing freely. I learned that silence kept the peace, and peace, however fragile, was safer than conflict. Friends who hadn't seen me in months would send messages I never answered. Invitations went unopened. The world outside my walls felt like a place I no longer belonged to, and I convinced myself it was easier to stay hidden. Silence was no longer just my shield. It was my prison. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself who I had become. How had I gone from a hopeful young woman to someone who barely recognized her own voice? Sometimes I thought about leaving, but the thought was drowned out by fear. Fear of what he might do if I tried. Fear of being alone. Fear that no one would believe me. He had convinced me I was weak, and in that weakness, he built his empire of control. Yet, beneath all the fear, a small ember of doubt began to glow. What if I didn't have to live like this? That ember grew the night he looked at me, his face inches from mine, and said with venom, "You deserve to be beaten." I didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't cry. I just stared at him in silence because in that silence I realized something terrifying. He truly believed it, and if he believed it once, he would believe it again. That was the moment a question began to form in my mind, a question I had buried for too long. What would happen if I finally asked for help? The thought of asking for help began like a whisper, faint and fragile, echoing in the back of my mind. At first, I ignored it, too afraid of what it meant. But the whisper grew louder with every bruise, every insult. Every night I lay awake wondering if tomorrow would be worse. One evening, when Daniel was asleep, I slipped out of bed and quietly opened my laptop. My hands trembled as I typed domestic abuse help into the search bar. I read page after page, my heart racing at the idea that there were numbers I could call, shelters I could go to, people who might actually believe me. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of possibility, but possibility was dangerous. Every sound in the house made me jump, terrified that he would wake up and catch me. When I heard him stir, I slammed the laptop shut and shoved it under the bed, my pulse hammering in my ears. I crawled back beside him, forcing my breath to steady as if nothing had happened. That night, I realized just how trapped I truly was. Even the act of thinking about escape felt like a crime. Yet once the thought existed, I couldn't erase it. It followed me everywhere, a quiet rebellion inside me. I started looking for small ways to test the waters. I left a message unanswered from an old friend, then later typed out a reply, just a few words, but more than I had dared in months. I told her I missed her. Her response came quickly, filled with warmth, asking if I was okay. I stared at the screen, wanting to spill everything, but fear silenced me again. Instead, I wrote that I was fine, that life was just busy. My words were lies, but the act of writing them reminded me of the voice I still had, even if it was buried under layers of fear. Daniel noticed the change in me almost immediately. Abusers always do. One evening, as I put my phone down, he asked sharply, "Who were you texting?" I froze, stammering about a grocery reminder, but his eyes narrowed. He didn't believe me, and in that moment, I felt the walls of my cage closing tighter. He began checking my phone regularly, scrolling through messages, demanding explanations for every number and every word. My attempt at connection had nearly cost me, and I knew one wrong move could unleash a storm I wasn't ready to face. Still, the idea of reaching out lingered. I began writing in a notebook, hiding it deep in the back of a drawer. In its pages, I poured out the words I couldn't say aloud. The fear, the loneliness, the longing for freedom. It was risky, but it gave me a sense of release, like a secret conversation with myself. Each page felt like a step toward reclaiming something he had stolen, my truth. But even that small act of defiance carried danger. If Daniel ever found it, I knew there would be no forgiveness, only punishment. The breaking point came one afternoon when I dialed a hotline number, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I didn't speak, just listened to the voice on the other end say, "Hello," twice, before I panicked and hung up. My heart pounded, my throat burned, and tears blurred my vision. I hadn't even said a word, but the act of calling felt monumental. For a moment, I felt both proud and terrified. Proud that I had tried, terrified that Daniel might somehow find out. I deleted the number from my call log and sat in silence, clutching the phone like it was both a weapon and a lifeline. But secrecy has its limits. One night, Daniel walked into the room unexpectedly as I quickly closed my notebook. His eyes flicked to the drawer, then to me, suspicion etched across his face. "What are you hiding?" he demanded. My mouth went dry, my body stiff. I forced a laugh, muttering something about doodles and shopping lists, but his gaze lingered. For the rest of the night, he hovered around me, watching my every move. It was as if he could sense the rebellion growing inside me, and his control tightened in response. His retaliation wasn't always physical. Sometimes it was psychological warfare. He accused me of being distant, of plotting against him, of caring more about strangers than about our marriage. He turned his suspicion into justification, convincing himself, and trying to convince me, that my desire for freedom was betrayal. The more I tried to hide, the more suffocating his presence became. Privacy disappeared completely. My phone was checked daily, my laptop locked away, even the mail opened before I could see it. He made sure I had no space left to breathe. And yet, even under the weight of his surveillance, the ember of hope refused to die. I thought of that hotline voice saying hello, and I imagined myself answering next time. I thought of my friend's message, still waiting for the truth, and wondered what would happen if I finally told her. The fear was crushing, but the thought of living like this forever was worse. Each small attempt, each quiet act of defiance reminded me that escape was possible, even if only in whispers for now. That's when I realized something Daniel hadn't accounted for. Silence could be broken, even if only in fragments. My words, my choices, my secret searches, they were all cracks in the walls he had built around me. And cracks, no matter how small, have the power to spread until the whole structure collapses. What I didn't know then was that my next attempt to reach out would bring me closer to freedom, but also dangerously close to being caught. The night everything changed began like so many others, with tension simmering beneath the surface. Daniel came home late, his steps heavy, his mood darker than the sky outside. I knew immediately to tread carefully, to keep my voice low, my movements small, but no amount of carefulness could have prevented what was about to happen. That night, he was looking for a fight, and I was the nearest target. His words flew like daggers, accusing me of things I hadn't done, questioning every detail of my day. I stayed silent, hoping silence would protect me, but silence had lost its power. The blow came harder than ever before. My body hit the floor, the air knocked from my lungs, my vision swimming. I remember the metallic taste of blood and the ringing in my ears as his shouting blurred into noise. For the first time, I thought I might not survive. Fear had always been a constant companion, but that night it turned into something else. Certainty. If I stayed, he would destroy me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Lying there on the floor, I realized that silence was no longer survival. It was surrender. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw the truth etched into my bruises. My face was swollen, my body sore, but it was my eyes that scared me most. They were hollow, lifeless, like the reflection of someone already gone. And for the first time, I whispered to myself words I had never dared to say out loud. I can't do this anymore. The whisper felt foreign, fragile, but it was real. That was the moment I decided I had to leave, even if it cost me everything. Leaving wasn't simple. Daniel's control was everywhere, over the money, the phones, even the doors. I knew that if I simply ran, he would find me. So I started planning quietly, carefully, as if each step were a thread in a web I hoped he wouldn't notice. I memorized the hotline number I had once been too afraid to call. I began stashing small amounts of cash whenever I could, change from groceries, a few bills hidden in the lining of a purse. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline, and lifelines are made of fragile strands. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. Around Daniel, I forced myself to smile, to nod, to act as though I was still the obedient, silent wife he expected. Inside, I was trembling, terrified he would sense my secret. Every time his eyes lingered on me, I wondered if he knew. Every time he asked, "What are you thinking about?" I swallowed the truth and said, "Nothing." But the truth was everything. The truth was freedom, waiting just beyond the bars of my cage. I confided in no one, not even my family. The shame was still there, wrapping itself around me like a chain. What if they didn't believe me? What if they blamed me? But more than shame, it was fear that kept me quiet. If Daniel found out before I was ready, I knew what he was capable of. So my plan remained mine alone, a fragile secret I carried in silence. Each day I survived was another day closer to escape. Then came the night that nearly exposed everything. I had tucked a slip of paper into my wallet, a note with the hotline number written in case I lost my nerve again. Daniel found it while searching for cash, and his face twisted with suspicion. "What's this?" he demanded, waving the paper in front of me. My heart stopped. I stammered, my mind racing for an excuse. I mumbled something about writing down a friend's number, forcing a shaky laugh. For a moment, his eyes burned into mine, searching for cracks. Then, to my relief, he tossed it aside, muttering under his breath. I knew then how close I had come to losing everything. That close call made the urgency even clearer. I couldn't wait any longer. The walls were closing in, the danger growing heavier each day. I decided I would call the hotline again, but this time I would speak. That night, after Daniel fell into a drunken sleep, I tiptoed to the bathroom, locked the door, and dialed the number. My hands shook, my voice cracked, but I forced the words out. My name is Emily. I need help. For the first time, my silence was broken, and it felt like the sound of survival. The woman on the other end didn't rush me. She listened, gently guiding me through each sentence as I told her pieces of my story. For the first time, someone believed me. She gave me options, explained resources I didn't know existed, and told me something I had long forgotten. You are not alone. I cried silently into the phone, my tears soaking the sleeve of my shirt. Those words planted themselves deep in me, stronger than any lie Daniel had ever told. They gave me courage where there had only been fear. I didn't leave that night. I wasn't ready yet. But the plan was no longer a whisper, no longer just a dream. It was real. I had a number to call, people who knew my name, and a path, however dangerous, that could lead me out. As I hung up the phone and wiped my face, I felt something stir inside me that I thought had died long ago. Hope. And hope, once it takes root, is impossible to silence. What I didn't know then was that the hardest part was still ahead, turning hope into action and silence into escape. When I finally walked out of that house, I carried nothing but a small bag and a heart full of fear. My body was trembling, my legs felt weak, but for the first time in years, my steps were my own. I remember the night vividly, the silence of the street, the cool air against my skin, the sound of my heartbeat louder than the echo of my footsteps. I wasn't sure where the path would lead, but I knew it was away from him, and that was enough. That was survival. The days that followed were not easy. Freedom does not erase scars, it only allows them to heal. I struggled with guilt, with shame, with the heavy question of why I stayed so long. I replayed moments in my head, asking myself if I could have left earlier, if I could have been stronger. But healing taught me something important. Survival is strength, even when it doesn't look like it. Every silent night, every hidden plan, every breath I took, despite the fear, that was strength. And if you are listening to me now, still living in silence, I want you to know that your survival is strength too. Rebuilding my life felt like learning how to breathe again. I had to remember who Emily was before fear stole her voice. I began reconnecting with people I had lost, slowly, cautiously, explaining pieces of my truth. Some cried, some held me, and some simply said, "I'm glad you're safe." Those words mattered more than anything. They reminded me that I was not invisible, not erased. Step by step, I began to exist again, not as his shadow, but as myself. Looking back now, I see my silence differently. It wasn't just weakness. It was a strategy, a shield, the only way I knew to survive until I was ready to speak. But silence alone can't save us forever. Eventually, we must find our voice, even if it shakes, even if it feels too small to matter. Because when we speak, we break the chains that hold us. When we speak, we tell the world that our stories matter. And they do. Your story matters. That is why I share mine here, with you. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Somewhere, someone may be living the same nights I once lived, staring at the same walls, hearing the same words that once broke me. And if this video reaches even one of them, if it plants even the smallest seed of courage, then every word I've spoken is worth it. Because silence is heavy, but voices connect, voices heal, voices change lives. So here is my request. If my story touched you, if it opened your eyes, if it gave you strength, or even just made you pause, please don't let it end here. Share this video with someone who might need it. Leave a comment, even just a few words, to remind me and others that we are not alone. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. This isn't just about my story. It's about creating a space where voices can rise from silence, where survivors can be seen, and where no one has to carry their pain alone. I am Emily. I am 26 years old, and I am no longer silent.